Hello, it is the Eco Project, and we're back, and I am Lisa Heidle,
And I'm Cristine Seidell.
and we are, as I said, the Ego Project, and we are going to a place that I don't talk about out loud very often. So,
A lot of us don't.
which is something that we are going to learn how to do better. We're going to learn more about, and it is the ego and sex, our sexual energy, our how we navigate our sexual lives, our sexual desires, our sexual identities, really, very
And
much who we are
experiences
sexually.
yeah. And our internal conversations, our external behaviors, and how that is all really tied back into our experiences, early on that either wounded or help support healthy ego.
That's great. And we're also going to talk a little bit today, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cristine, but how we can heal a lot of that sexual wounding where the ego is concerned.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready to jump in?
I am. I'm very excited about today.
Okay. Me too. Okay. So first question, how does the ego impact our sexuality?
Well, I think, what I love about this topic and, what we've really, we always go back to, and I love that our very first, one of our very first conversations was about the origin of the wounded ego, right? Because, ego only came about when it started becoming wounded, right? When harm was kind of brought to it. So, when we talk about the ego and its impact on sexuality, we really go back to the true self, right? So when we became us, right, we were good and amazing and wonderful and sexual, right? We were sexual energies as well. So we had all these things that made us different and unique and us, but we also had sexual energy that came along with us as well, right? Because that is what is to take us into the world. And, some of us are going to procreate, and we're supposed to also have pleasure, right? So being our true self is about having sexual pleasure as well. So sexual energy is part of who we are when we come into this world, and we are our true self, right? And you can even look at the developmental stages of infancy and childhood, and you'll see that sexual awareness begins to happen in very pure and naive ways, right? That are it's just our way of experiencing ourselves as sexual people, right? So, knowing that we are born with these sexual energies, the ego, as we become aware of people projecting things on us, whether it's guilt and shame, whatever, in who we are, so does our sexual energy as well. So it could be your family system, it could be the culture of your community, it could be religious belief systems, right? But as we, navigate through childhood and through the developmental stages, sexual energy is also projected upon, right? So, and that goes into our ego's collective experiences. And so if we are in a system where there's shame and guilt, or even just it's not discussed, right? Like you don't talk about sex, you don't talk about sexuality, you don't talk about puberty, right? Then our sexual energies, right? Our sexual experiences and understandings tend to have something projected onto it. And through that projection is where that wounding occurs, and our identity within a sexual energy often becomes wounded as well.
So many people that I've spoken with, and when they found out the topic, there was a little bit of hesitation, and then, oh, I'm really interested in that. And our culture, as you and I've talked in the past, it was established through the Puritans, the Calvinists, and there was a lot of sexual repression, and, we're not going to unpack all of that, roles of women and,
right, exactly,
children, but really, it was a very patriarchal society that was very much meant to keep people in line.
Yeah, exactly.
Really. And, sexual expression was definitely not something that was encouraged. And it was definitely for procreation.
Correct.
overall,
Yeah.
that's how it was, spoken about. And for women, the 1970s was the sexual revolution.
Mhm.
Women had more control over their bodies, were more interested in pleasure for self.
Right. Right.
And if you think about that, I mean, that's infancy for a new
Yes.
idea.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
really is.
that is not that long ago that this
It's really,
awareness, yeah, started
yeah,
coming. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
And
so, go ahead.
sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I actually didn't have anything to say.
That's right. I'm sure that you did, and it was very wise. But I think one of the hardest things for people to have an understanding of is the difference between sex and intimacy.
Mhm.
Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about those? I mean, you can have one, or you can have the other, or you can have the two, but
Mhm.
how do people confuse the two? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I think that intimacy actually is something that is probably relatively new or even unknown to some people, right? Because, when we talk about, sexual expression, and a vast number of people, especially, females, not really being able to have a lot of sexual expression for a long period of time, or, for generations, we haven't really had it for generations. There is, you're talking about sex, and then you're talking about intimacy. So that's a layer on top of sexuality, which, some people may have not even experienced, as men and women, collectively may not have experienced both sex and intimacy. So the difference between sex and intimacy is intimacy is really about closeness, right? It's really about connection. We can have sex and not feel close to somebody or connected to somebody. It could be just a physical act. But intimacy really is about closeness and connection. So it's almost an energetic sharing, whereas sex is a physical sharing of the body, right? Sex, sexual intimacy is feeling close and connected while having sex. Just like you can have emotional intimacy, you feel close and connected while having deep conversations about feelings and whatnot, right? So intimacy really is about the connected, energetic closeness of people while they're having sex. So that would be sexual intimacy. Sex in and of itself is really just a physical experience.
Yeah.
But sexual intimacy is having sex and sharing in closeness and connected and in connecting with that other person.
Would you say, and please know, there's no judgment if someone wants to have healthy, consensual sex with
Yeah,
another adult, and it's just a sexual experience, that
correct.
is
Yeah.
perfectly up to them, as long as both people have
Mhm.
an
Are
understanding.
consenting, and yeah,
Yeah,
and understand that this is the expectation of this
yeah,
time, and people who are extremely close and connected relationships have a lot of sex. That's just sex, right? They don't
yeah.
always have this intimate sexual relationship, right? And so we can ebb and flow out of sexual intimacy depending on what else is going on in our lives. Even with a partner we've been with and we love dearly, we may not always have sexual intimacy, in every sexual experience.
Yeah. I think I love that you're using the word pleasure a lot, because sex is to be pleasurable.
Mhm.
Of course, if you're having discomfort or pain, definitely see your doctor about that. And there could be underlying health reasons, there could be maybe some psychological reasons. So
Yeah.
definitely look into that. And that's as we open up more in our culture to being able to talk freely and ask questions of people that we trust and
Mhm.
feel safe with, and our partners, as well as friends, family members, professionals, then it will bring more pleasure into our lives. And we're pleasurable beings, and that's what we want,
Absolutely.
which I think
Yeah.
is so important. Now,
Right.
would you say that in order to have sexual intimacy with someone, um, that there has to be a level of safety felt there, that this person has your well-being at heart. Would you say that that's very important?
Yeah, and I think this is where we get a lot of confusion, is that when people feel like they have this really passionate sexual experience with somebody, they're like, oh, was this the most intimate experience? We met, at a bar, and, then we had this night full of, the intimacy between us. And that can be really dangerous, because we're using the word intimate when it may just be passionate, and not to discredit passionate, having a passionate sexual experience with somebody, but to call it intimacy, it can be very misleading, right? And so intimacy really does require the feeling of feeling safe with this person, that you can trust this person, that you can be vulnerable. Really, vulnerability is what is introduced into that relationship that builds intimacy. Without vulnerability, you can't be intimate with somebody, right? Because you can't get close enough to feel connected, right? So intimacy, yes, 100%. The sexual relationship has to feel very safe. And that brings in so many components of emotionality, conversations about trust and commitment, or honesty of what's going on in the relationship. And that really does come down to, I am safe with this person in our understanding of our sexual relationship.
So where the wounded ego and the ego damage that's done, the ego wounding that's done, whether it's through, your family, whether it's through trauma, whether it's through lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. So where does the wounded ego come into play when it comes into a healthy sex life?
I mean, I think the wounded ego is such a big piece of people's sexual experiences, because I think I think sexuality and our sexual selves, that story begins very much in childhood, right? And the wounded ego occurs when something is projected on us, right? So, we talked about like, oh, you're too much, or, I don't have time for you, at our emotional needs, right? But our sexual energetics really start coming up right around puberty, right? Is where we start recognizing our body is changing. We have sexual energy before that, but it's not what's leading us. What's leading us before that is really more of our creative energies, more of our authentic emotional energies. Sexual energy really starts kind of coming to our awareness through puberty. So really right before puberty, it's kind of like, how is sex and your sexual body and parts, and even just, your energy, how is that being talked about and talked to you about, right? So, some people will, they may have a parent who has had very negative sexual experiences and may project that onto the child by, basically being like, we don't talk about sex. We don't, you don't even think about having sex until you're married, right? And so all of a sudden, the sexual energy that is now coming out in puberty is like shut down, right? So it's puberty automatically calls it out. I think you said something wonderful. It's like this kundalini, right? Like the awakening of the body, right? The sexual energy as we go through puberty is being awakened, right? Because physiologically, we're getting to a place where we can procreate, and where our body is becoming more developed to be pleasurable, right? So there are, nerves and nerve endings and the position of different, or, nerve sensors in our body that come out in puberty, right? That become much more formed so that sex would be pleasurable. So all of this stuff is happening and the body is becoming sexually awakened, and we're receiving messages, which could probably be very confusing. We may be receiving messages of shame and, immorality, right? And then we go and look on social media or on the movies or whatever, and all it is sex, right? So we get these very misleading messages, and it's very difficult in childhood to understand and process that unless you have somebody to help guide you through that. I work with a lot of kids, and I have a lot of kids that come and talk to me about sex, that fifth grade, fifth, sixth grade, they're like, I don't feel like I can talk to my parents about this, but I'm starting to get boobs. And it's like, okay, we can talk about that, right? So in that stage, there's a lot of wounding because culturally, we don't know how to talk about sex. We project sex. And that can be very, very difficult for a child to have sexual energy and navigate into adulthood with it. And so we see adults with very dysregulated sexual energy. Yep. So we have, kind of we're going to go back to some of the vocabulary we've used in previous videos where we talk about the internalizers and the externalizers. So internalizers, when we talk about wounded ego and sexual energy, these are going to be the ones that tend to feel very shameful about sex, right? Or very inadequate when it comes to sex. And so in their minds, they, if they have sexual experiences, they'll be like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. I don't want anybody to know that I had sex. I need to never do that again. I need to make an agreement to not do this. Or they'll, think things like, I wonder if I'm bad at sex, if she doesn't call me, like it's probably because there's, I'm inadequate in some way. And so they will have these stories that kind of lead into their own inadequacy as a sexual person. Now, the externalizers will feel very, very insecure in their sexual energy, but they want to go find others or other experiences to validate their sexuality. So in the externalizers will probably become very seductive, very, promiscuous, and probably very sexualized, even at an earlier age, to kind of almost fake it till you make it in their own sexual, identity, so to speak.
I think so often when we move into relationships that with a sexual component, that's part of the relationship. And very often, I don't know very often, but sometimes you get partners that are incompatible in that area. And they knew it going into the relationship, they knew it early on, but they were committed to being in the relationship. Can you speak a little bit to how that impacts that incompatibility, whether it's, the woman has a higher sex drive than the man has a higher sex drive than the woman. Maybe they prefer different things for pleasure, and either through lack of communication or lack of understanding on either side. I always say that, a good sex life cannot save a relationship, but a bad sex life can ruin one.
And tank it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
100%. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit to how that plays out because I'm assuming the lack of ability to communicate and talk about this and to find solutions is wounded ego driven, correct?
100%. And so that is actually something, you hit the nail on the head. Like when I started seeing couples, it was amazing how even 2-3 sessions into, therapy, they were still not talking about their sex life. Right. And so even with ourselves and with our partners, we're very often not open and honest and authentic about what we want sexually or what we would like sexually, right? Or hearing what other people have to say about that. So even within our relationships, we're still extremely uncomfortable talking about sex. And so it really does require oftentimes somebody who is comfortable talking about sex, just bringing the topic up, right? And a lot of the relationships that I've seen and I've experienced that end up kind of, ending is because a lot of it is sexually related. Sex and money tend to be the biggest issues within relationships. And those are two of the biggest issues that are not spoken about, and so part of that is we have to know ourselves as sexual people. So then we can talk to somebody else, our partner, about sexual expectations, desires, hopes, right? We're not when you come together in a sexual relationship, you really don't know what you're getting, right? Like you are 100% unaware until you are aware. Right?
You don't know. And sometimes it looks good on paper and you're like, that was bumpy and weird.
Right.
Yeah.
Or somebody may, somebody might build those expectations up real high. And then you're like, that's not what was on the sticker price.
Yeah, that's not, no, yeah.
Right.
Don't
So
fall.
exactly. Yeah. So like our sexual experiences are completely unknown when we're with somebody new, right? It's not until we know that we end up knowing, right? And it's almost at that time, something's imprinted on us, right? It's like we had these thoughts and feelings about it, then it occurred. And after that imprinting, we're kind of like, I can't go back to what I thought before, or I don't know if I can see past this, right? It's like all of a sudden that experience, if it was good, we're like, awesome. If it was not good, we're like, ooh, right? Like we will push away from that because it would be too uncomfortable to talk about. So yeah. Yes. So yeah, sexual conversations are and talking about ourselves as sexual people without projecting anything and or withdrawing from something is 100% what healthy, intimate relationships require.
Do you find, thank you for that. That was so insightful. That feeling of we don't have to automatically check someone off because, as long as the communication is open, that's good.
Exactly,
so do you find that the more codependent a relationship where, they're very entangled, the more issues with the sex? I don't know if I'm asking that. Yeah. I'm thinking of, you have codependent and then you have interdependent.
Yeah.
And right. And can you talk a little bit about the differences there and how sex lives kind of line up?
Can you hear the water exploding behind me?
I can. I thought I was like something was happening behind me. So that's good to know.
It's here. My sprinklers just turned on. So I'm going to see if they're going to calm down, but if not, then we can take a little trip inside. So codependent behavior is really, where one person kind of sacrifices or changes their own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in order to get a desired result from the other person. Right? So codependency is really where one person is trying to change the behavior of somebody else. So if you look at that from the perspective of sexual, experiences and sexual intimacy, codependency is going to really bring about some difficult relationships because one person is probably going to deny thyself, right, in order to get the other person to desire them or to pursue them or to accept them, right? So you end up having in codependent relationships, especially sexual relationships, somebody who's extremely unfulfilled and then somebody who is not doing the work to be engaged with the other person. So you see this very kind of like uneven and unbalanced sexual relationship, which only breeds anger and resentment. And so that's where, the codependent sexual relationship is one that is very difficult to heal from because the patterns are so ingrained and they're in so many different levels of those relationships, but they're also one that they're very difficult to get, the codependent one to change because that is literally saying, I'm not available to meet your needs. You have to meet your own needs and I'm going to start working on my needs and then we can come together and have these experiences. But when you have somebody who's codependent, you typically have somebody who will feed off of that and take. So as the codependent starts pulling back, the other person will be like, well, why aren't you filling my needs, right? Mm-hmm. So think of it as like an internalizer and externalizer kind of coming together. Those are typically how we see them. You see one that's giving and doing and the other one who's taking and receiving.
And so in a sexual relationship, and when I say sexual, I'm talking about the sexual with intimacy, you know, if you're, you know, partnered or dating someone, or, you know, even, you know, friends with benefits, you know, you
Right.
want to make sure that the communication is open.
Yeah.
And, you know, a relationship is not just a sexual entity. You're not in a relationship just for sex,
Right.
obviously. But, you know, that's the difference between a platonic friendship
Right.
and an intimate relationship, romantic relationship,
Yeah.
is that you have that sexual component. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And, you know, sexual intimacy comes with emotional intimacy. And that's because you've had conversations, you've had, you know, you've made commitments or you've made agreements, you have terms and conditions at which the relationship is going to navigate through. And that's what has built the trust that you can be intimate with them emotionally and sexually, you know. And unfortunately, within codependent relationships, you know, especially when it comes to sexuality, is somebody who may have codependent traits is not necessarily saying, I'm not comfortable with that, or, you know, I don't feel like turned on by that. You know, they're kind of like, you know, whatever you like, whatever you want, that's what I like too, right? Because they don't want to be rejected by the other person. And so, you know, that's so dangerous, because you can't really have a real emotional sexual intimacy unless you're authentic, you know, because that's what brings about conversations, you know.
yeah. We have a question from a viewer today. Are you open to taking questions?
100%. That's exciting.
Yeah. Okay, and this is from a cisgender male.
Okay.
And he his question, it was a good question, and you know, I'm gonna let you answer. I have my own thoughts about it, but you know, he's curious about what happens when you have a very strong sexual connection with someone, and you know, that you've been in a relationship with, the relationship has ended, but that sexual energy is still there.
Right.
And it seems kind of hard to disengage from it. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And do you want to kind of explain what cisgendered is for our
Oh,
viewers?
yes, thank you. Yeah. My understanding is cisgender, I'm a cisgender woman. I'm straight, and I prefer males, and that I identify as males. And so cisgender male would be someone who prefers females. Yeah. Identifying females. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and, you know, I think as we, you know, as we talk about relationships and sexuality and stuff, we, you know, we do have a whole new like set of vernacular and vocabulary. So we'll try to support, you know, our viewers and listeners as we go into that. So, so this is a huge thing. I hear this all the time, you know, with a lot of clients who are talking about, oh, you know, we have this amazing sexual energy together, you know, our sexual experiences are just, you know, so far outside of what, you know, I've had in the past, or I'm concerned I won't have in the future. So we've broken up, but we just can't seem to, like, you know, we keep coming back to this place of sexual, like, you know, attractiveness and stuff. And, you know, so the question is like, is he wanting to, does he move on? Or like, is this something that is always going to be?
I think my understanding, he's ready to disengage. He's
Right.
ready to move forward. And but you know, the connection is still very strong.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, I think there are people in our lives that we do have kind of an energetic connection with. You know, it might be that our sexual energies are really on the same vibration, you know, and so like when they come together, it's very much in flow and it's very much in alignment. And so like it feels good to be with them, right? Unfortunately, you know, with sex, whenever we come together and have sex or sexual exchanges, we are connecting in some way, right? And so if you are recognizing, hey, we're drawn to each other, but like we can't make a relationship work out of it, then there is a level of disconnect that you have to have occur, because, you know, energy is energy is energy, right? So if you're continue to go to the same place and match their energy, then you're only going to be a match for that energy, right? Rather than disengaging, coming back to yourself, pursuing your true self again, and then going and moving forward and seeing where you're an energetic match for other people. I'm assuming if they're disengaging, it's because they have a great sexual energy, but they don't have a great relationship energy, right? So is that really authentic to their true self? Probably not. That's why there's this disconnect, right? So really what that is saying is that, hey, there is something out there that will be in alignment with that sexual energy, but also with the relationship energy, right? But the more we continue to match with that other person's energy is the more we're going to continue to stay matched to that energy, you know? So we have to withdraw, we have to disengage, create that boundary, right? That I'm no longer available for this sexual experience anymore because I choose this for me, right? I don't know where it's at, I don't know when, but I choose to be in alignment for that. And so I'm going to disengage, get back, do the work to get back to my true self so that my sexual energy can be a match with a relationship that I desire as well.
Yep.
So those are some of those thoughts and beliefs that we cling to because we are unaware of the unknown, right?
Well, and I think our wounded ego tells us, and from our culture that is, romantic movies and all these other aspects that are brought into our understanding of what, since we don't talk about it, but what connection really is it's a sexual connection, right? And that makes, and that's the highest that you can have. It's like, and when it's healthy and it's to people who know who they are and it's authentic and they're available to be engaged in a consensual sexual relationship, it can be incredible, but I think that wounded ego very often tells us that, well, because like you said, the sex is so good, there must be a deeper connection here.
Correct.
And that's not discounting that two people on the same sexual energy, that's a rare thing.
Correct. Yeah.
And and to say, wow, that was an amazing experience. I'm so grateful that we had it, but I'm looking for that and something else, a relationship, something, more layers to it than that. And, if you're compatible in the bedroom and outside of the bedroom, it's toxic. Oh, you spend a lot more time outside that bedroom than you do in it.
Right. And that goes to the same thing. Like if you have this great, amazing relationship where you get along, you have a lot of the same interests, you make great friends, right? But you are not in alignment in the sexual department, it's going to be the same thing. Like you can't rely on one or the other. You have to have both. If that's what you desire, if you desire a relationship that is healthy and strong and good and a great sexual life, you have to really have both. You cannot go into a relationship with totally dysregulated sexual energies, but be great friends and expect that not to be an issue later on. And you can't go into relationships and have amazing alignment in sexual energies, but have a lot of toxicity and everything else. That isn't going to last long either, So, and that's what I love about sexuality, is that sexuality really does end up desiring the emotional component to it, right? When we talk about intimacy, we really are bringing the sexual and the emotional together, and they're coming together. It's very rare that we find people who are so, in alignment sexually, really make great relationships if they don't have that foundational friendship and values and belief systems and all that stuff that are the same, and vice versa. Really intimacy needs both in order to be a healthy, intimate relationship.
So it really is it's alchemy.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. It's bringing it all in together and letting it all work together. But I think, once again, the healing of that ego has to happen first.
It has to, yeah.
So as I'm a woman and I'm going to speak as a woman here, knowing what I desire, knowing what is comfortable for me and what is uncomfortable for me, knowing where my boundaries are, are so important, and being able to communicate those. And that has taken work. It's taken a lot of work, and I still struggle at times. I make mistakes. I find myself trying to perform, in a certain way to draw attention, all the things that we do when we've had wounding and
Right.
we are healing it. And I think it's a lifetime journey. I
Yeah.
don't know anyone that I've ever encountered that has had no wounding,
Right.
especially in this area, whether
Mhm.
it's, early life trauma, where it's relationship trauma, where it's, walking down the street and getting catcalled.
Yeah.
That's assault.
Hmm.
It's unwanted attention.
Yeah.
And, as women, we're told, well, what's your problem?
Hmm. Hmm.
Smile about it, just
Yeah.
ignore them. And
Right.
it's like, no, I don't have to, and I need to heal the wounding that's now been done to
Right.
me.
Yeah.
So
And I think even, for, when we talk about sexuality, we're talking about like the highest level of vulnerability. We are literally naked.
oh,
We are, every inch of our body is being looked at,
yeah,
and so, we have to be mindful that when we enter this relationship with somebody, that we are in a good, ego to be able to be at that level of vulnerability so many times. And this is why I love this series, is because I do feel like as a collective, we want to heal, right? We want to be whole. We want to have these healthy relationships, because we've all experienced where we haven't been healthy, and we've put ourselves out there in these vulnerable places, and then more wounding has occurred, right? And so that's why, the series is so amazing, is it brings attention to, listen, what you desire, right? Like having this amazing sexual relationship, loving your sexual energy, not having shame about your sexual energy is good, but you can't put that sexual energy out there in situations and relationships that is going to wound it again, because we are absolutely in the most vulnerable position when we open ourselves up sexually.
because sex is, it's like it's an energetic exchange.
Mhm, mhm.
And just like you spend time with certain friends because you like their energy, and
Yep.
you work at certain places because you like the energy there, or eat at restaurants, it's the same thing. You
Mhm.
don't want to be sharing that sexual energy with
Yeah.
someone who is not going to honor it and
Correct.
respect it and be
Yeah.
reciprocal with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's where opening up the communication. So can you talk a little bit about how people can either open or reopen the conversation of sex, in relationships, or, with themselves
Yeah.
even? Yeah. How do you start, open that door into that conversation?
Right. So just like sex is raw, our conversations need to be raw. We cannot continue to dance around the language of sex. You and I talked about this earlier, about how, like, even in puberty in our culture, we don't use the term menstruation or your period. We're like, oh, Aunt Flo came to see me today, or, like, we use the language of minimizing or dismissing the sexuality behind, developmental phases that are sexually foundational, right? And so the best way to have a conversation about sex is to have a conversation about sex, right? In a relationship, when you start dating somebody, and you're interested in pursuing that, you can tell they're interested in that as well, being like, hey, so we've gone on a couple dates, right? Like, I've definitely got to know you, so on and so forth. I know this is on your mind. It's definitely on mine. What are your thoughts about sex? What are your expectations? What have been your experiences that you feel comfortable sharing? Opening the conversation to honoring that person as a sexual person. That's really what you're doing, is you're seeing them and hearing them as a person with sexual energy. And we do not honor ourselves or others in that place because it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah. Thank you. I think knowing that, it may be an uncomfortable conversation. with a partner or someone that, you're interested in, but opening it up and allowing the conversations to flow. And that doesn't mean that if I'm dating someone and we start talking, open up the conversation for sex, that means we're going to have sex. That means that we're taking this to the next level of intimacy. We're sharing that.
Yeah. And the conversation itself is a way to develop intimacy.
Exactly. Yeah. That you're vulnerable. Yeah. You trust someone. Yeah.
And I think, when we don't have these conversations, what's funny is we have these conversations without having these conversations, and what that looks like is we make jokes, or we do flirty stuff like, oh, you can't handle this, right? We make these statements, these sexual statements of like our sexual prowess, right? Like, I'm basically saying, hey, expect me to be amazing, right? Or we might say something to the exact opposite, right? So we're having these conversations, we're putting this out there without really being vulnerable and without really being authentic. And that's where it can be really confusing then when you do come together and maybe it's dysregulated. Maybe you both didn't have the same experience. Maybe you had an amazing experience and then that's your expectation moving forward, right? And then you can be disappointed when every sexual experience is not like that sexual experience, right? So we do a real disservice to ourselves when we're not really honest with ourselves and have conversations about our sexuality with ourselves. Like what, how do I see myself sexually? It's okay that I'm attracted to myself. Like, it's okay that I enjoy and receive pleasure during sex, so having those conversations with ourselves. And then also, when it's time in our relationships, just say the word, let's talk about sex. What are your thoughts about it? Being open and direct is the best way to build that first level of intimacy to see if this is something that you really do want to pursue with somebody.
Do you find that it's best, if someone is, they're dating, they're not, trying to find the one, the relationship, but they're actively dating and, just to see what's out there. Do you find that them opening up that conversation with, I'm not looking for anything serious, but I am interested in a sexual relationship, like how do you, especially women, I think that sometimes women feel that it's going to put them at risk.
Yeah.
Or they're going to be judged. They're going to be perceived as being, loose or whatever the vernacular, how do you encourage women and men to talk about where they're at, because it is a spectrum. There's been times in my life when, my focus has been on my finances, my work life, my creativity. And there's times where my focus is, investing in this relationship. And then I move back and forth on that. And so how do you encourage people or kind of guide them to talk about it?
Yeah, the very first step is to have the conversation with yourself. Be honest with yourself. What are you really looking for, right? If you are in a season of your life where you are looking for a relationship and you do want to date somebody with exclusivity, and you start having a conversation and somebody's like, I'm really not interested in that right now. I'm really just looking for, some casual, sexual relationships. Be honest with yourself and say, thank you for letting me know. I appreciate your honesty. I am actually looking for a relationship. So I'm going to, best of luck to you, right? Like, be honest with yourself so that you don't subject yourself to being vulnerable in something that isn't really open for vulnerability, right? And vice versa, right? If you aren't wanting a relationship and somebody is saying that they do not allow them to pursue something sexual with you. Right? People are not commodities that you are supposed to use. We honor each other's energies. If you are talking to somebody and they are saying they want a relationship, it is inappropriate to then have sex with them, because again, that's an energetic exchange. We are making an imprint energetically with somebody at that point, So with maturity, with a healthy ego, we also have to honor others' positions and desires, so that we're not using people as commodities to just fill our own needs.
Thank you. I keep thanking you because thank you. This is such great insight because I find it very empowering. And so often the way that we learn about sex is through trial and error. That's a big, like you said, we have to honor other people's energy, sexual energy, and their feelings, their heart, and when we are very focused on our own pleasure, getting our needs met, we're not thinking about the other person.
Right.
And I've made that error. I had to learn that trial and error. And having you use the language of opening the conversation and saying, okay, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, someone who is, up for a good time, right? To go and have some fun and enjoyable, and we can, enjoy each other's company, and then we both kind of go about our business, and then we'll come back to, or, I'm actively looking for a relationship, and, you're not, and, it's so wonderful to meet you, but, and if you wait till after the fact.
Correct. Yes. And you have that dysregulated energy of somebody is going to be harmed in that moment, right? Because it will feel like rejection because you've already exchanged energy, right? So through sex, we are having the exchange of energy, but there is an emotional component, right? So there is, sex and passion and love and hate are all kind of like tied in together, right? Sex is not emotionless. You may have somebody who is not as open and as transparent emotionally, but they have emotional components to sex, right? And so if you're not open and honest and honoring of other people's sexual energies and expectations, terms and conditions is what I call it, then you're really setting yourself up to be in dysregulated energy, not only with that person, but with other people, because you're really not being authentic. And if you're not authentic, you're not in alignment, you're not in flow. So
that's so good. And let me ask you this, how I've seen a lot of partners, not seen them, but heard them, talk to people, and they feel that it's their job to heal their partner's sexual issues, right? Like they don't like certain things in the bedroom. So it's their job to show them why they will like them. That's like,
right.
I don't think that's really your place. It's up for the, so, but I could be mistaken, maybe, to me, it's if, the open communication will allow for exploration and, new ways of pleasuring, that type of thing. But can you talk about that when you have partners who think it's their job to heal their partner's sexual hangups?
Right. So, I think that's, again, we need to have the conversation early on. Do we see things generally the same, right? When it comes to sexual experiences, and the reality is we're not, we're all coming from a collectively different perspective, some with more and some with less experiences, right? But I do think that when we come to these conversations, we don't judge each other either way, right? Either in our, like thoughts that somebody is overly experienced or, risky behaviors or whatever, and or that they are underexperienced and prudish or something along those lines. It's really important that when we're having, the conversation about sexuality and meeting somebody in that space, that we don't judge each other, right? Because our sexual experiences are ours, right? And they are for us to be ready to express and to hold and to release if we need to, right? So when you talk about a partner feeling like it's their job to heal their past sexual hangups, you're really going into shaky territory. If you're at a place that you believe your partner needs healing, then there's probably some judgment that's being projected there. And that's going to feel really unsafe for the other person. So intimacy is going to be pretty tough to reach, so if you're recognizing, oh, I feel like they need to get over this and that, you might need to take a step back and be like, well, how am I coming at this relationship? I think you can talk about, your sexual experiences, and, there may be something you're like, I don't know if I'm down for that, but I'm willing to hear, what your thoughts are. And, it might be something I'd be open to, and it might not be, I just know that right now, that's something I'm a little, unsure of. Right. But if you're hearing things and you're like, oh my gosh, like there is no way I would ever do that, then you need to start figuring out, are we sexually compatible?
And that's okay if you're not. I think that people think that that's the worst thing that can happen, that you're not sexually compatible with someone. It's like, there's billions of people on this planet.
Right.
I'm pretty sure you're going to find someone you're sexually compatible with.
Exactly.
You got some good odds,
Yeah, right.
and yeah, it's a numbers game. No,
right.
it's
Exactly.
not unless you choose for it to be a numbers game.
Right. Yeah.
Just make sure it's from a healthy ego.
Correct. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So, but I think that's so important to be, to recognize that, because there's nothing worse than, committing to a long-term relationship and feeling rejected
Yes.
time after time again. And that's going to damage an ego.
Right. That builds that anger and resentment, right, that we talked about, last time when we were talking about healthy repair. When we are continuing to subject ourselves into something that feels like, if somebody is projecting something that makes us feel unworthy or inadequate or rejected, all that does is build anger and resentment. And that, when it sets into a relationship, is really, really hard to release and work through. I mean, that's where you're really having to bring in a professional to undo the layers. And sex being something that a lot of people have a hard time talking about, will let years and experiences continue to accumulate without having any conversations about it. That doesn't mean that sometimes we don't, sometimes we have sexual experiences with maybe somebody we're, committed in a relationship to, and we're kind of like, man, that wasn't really good, or that was a little awkward, right? But we talk about it. We're like, hey, was that like, is something, going on? Do you need to talk about it? Like, is it the changes in me? Like what, what's kind of going on? I have a lot of clients who come in and will not talk to their partners about certain sexual things that they're experiencing in the bedroom. And I'm like, you're honoring the other person when you talk about these things in kind and respectful ways. You're saying you love your partner, but this is a loving gesture to give them, is this conversation, so that you guys do not propel and move forward with anger and resentment just accumulating, after experiences. Or what happens a lot of times is you just stop having sexual experiences and not talk about it. And then you're opening up the door to a whole other realm of issues that can enter into a relationship.
I so love, like I said, the empowerment of this, that first you have the conversation with yourself, you figure out who you are sexually and what your sexual energy is. And your sexual energy, it might be, you may be asexual, you may not have much of a sex drive, and that's okay, but you have to know that in order to communicate that to a potential partner. Because if you don't, and that partner has an expectation, you are already starting off on shaky ground, and you need to communicate that. And, then once you know who you are, and you know your sexual energy, and you know what you like, what your desires, what your values are, what you will and will not do, then you can talk to your partner or potential partner and say, this is where I'm at, and this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And now tell me, like you said, without judgment. I mean, if they say something and that they are interested in, and you're like, not a chance on this planet. I'm out,
Yeah.
But just let them know, I wish you well.
Yeah.
There's someone out there that will definitely be there with you, but I'm not.
Yeah, but I'm out. And we do have the ability to grow and change in our sexual, experiences, energies, desires, all those things, we don't really have permission to just pull the rug out from under somebody, you know. And that, you know, I do have clients that come in and, you know, they'll say, hey, before we got married, you know, we had this great sexual relationship and then we got married and we haven't had sex in like 10 years, you know. It was that we used to have sex and now, you know, my partner won't even take a shower with me, right? So, you know, we have, you know, the right to have, you know, change in our preferences and stuff like that, but we don't mislead our partners, right? And so if we do have this major shift in ourself and our sexual energies, we need to go work on that individually. We need to go work on that because something else is going on, and typically it's psychological, you know, is what is and it may not be something that started in that relationship or that has happened. Sometimes it's things from childhood. It could be past experiences that has set itself in the subconscious and is now coming out through, you know, kind of not wanting to be sexual. So it's really important that if you're in a relationship or if you're an individual that's like all of a sudden I want it all the time or I don't want it at all, like that's a real big red flag to go work with a professional to find out what's going on, because you can't enter a relationship not authentically feeling healthy and secure in your own sexual energy.
And thank you for saying that, because I think it's so important, you know, like you said, you know, we started off having sex all the time and now we don't have sex at all. And, you know, it is okay to change your mind. Nothing, that's what it's there for, to change, right? To change your mind, right? And it's okay to change your mind, but you have to have that line of communication open, and, you know, be open to exploring, because, you know, when you have the person, you have you, and then you have the relationship, and the relationship is its own entity that needs to be honored, and both partners needs have to be met in some manner. So thank you. Cristine, I could be mistaken about this. I think this is definitely another conversation. I think there's more here, and that we will be delving into as the Ego Project continues. This is so layered. There's so much to it. I have no doubt our listeners and viewers are going to get a lot from this. I know that I did. Is there anything that you want to add before we sign off today?
No, I mean, I love that, you know, our listeners are starting to send us, you know, comments about what they're getting from it, questions, you know, things that they would like to hear about. You know, keep sending them. You know, I know we're on YouTube right now. We're about to be on some of the podcast platforms, but, you know, I know it's hard to log in. You got to log in, you got to, you know, subscribe, you got to follow. It all has to be under your login, but please take the, you know, extra minutes to do that. Once you do it, so you don't have to do it again, but we'd love to really have you as subscribers, and we see you watching them. We just would love for you to subscribe and follow. And if you have a question, just drop it in the comments. You know, definitely with sex and ego, there are so many things that we can talk about, you know, so many things within relationships and sexuality. It's actually something it's coming a lot into the work that I'm doing with individuals. So it's really on the forefront of kind of where people are ready to heal. So I definitely think we'll have a lot more conversations about it. And it's really just fascinating in general to learn about how much of our sexual self, right? How much of our sexual self really goes into the ego and the experiences we had in childhood and through our past experiences sexually. So
well, I look forward to it. Me too. I think they're going to be great conversations, as this was. Thank you. I learned so much, as I always do.
Again. Yeah, absolutely.
So I just so enjoy our conversation.
Me too, for sure.
Okay, we will see you next time. And like Cristine said, please like, share, comment. Please share the videos with as many people as you can. We really want to reach more people. And like Cristine said, we are seeing plenty of views, but we need those subscribers and we need those likes. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I will see you next time, Cristine.
All right, sounds good. See you soon.